election entitlements. Now, the arguments over the near total dependence on the center by states is not lost, as citizens emphasize increased internal revenue as key to sustain development in the states. Now, for a country that is blessed with abundant resources, the challenge has been that of putting them to use for national development. Now, that's part of what we'll be talking about beyond the elections, the agenda for national development. But first, let's get to see this report by Timothy Yusuf.
Of choosing representatives to the federal, state and local governments, as Nigerians and the international community continue to discuss the successes and challenges of the just concluded presidential and national assembly elections, as well as governorship and state houses of assembly elections, the nation has again shown that the democratic culture is deepening. Winners have emerged, losers have also emerged. However, there are lessons to be learned to enhance subsequent elections as well as further development of the nation.
It's a good development and it's a remarkable improvement from 2015. And for it is what I could say that the vote of the people has begun to count in Nigeria very prominently, because you see that people voted their conscience. People voted somehow, not basically, yes, the party was on the ballot, but it depended on the candidate of those parties. So what we could see is that we could see a new development in the country.
We have had an election, and there are some lessons learned, and it is my hope that we definitely, as a people, work on those lessons.
While the Independent National Electoral Commission has been substantially given a pass mark on the peaceful conduct of the 2019 general elections, which saw the re-election of President Muhammadu Buhari among others, many believe that the task before every Nigerian is that of patriotism towards the attainment of a better country for all.
The Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, that's very, very fundamental to the economy of this country. Believe me, you can even say 100% of revenue, if you are talking about the contribution to the GDP, is from oil.
We need to keep Nigeria together. That is first. And I think we are, too. We need to bring every Nigerian to the table.
Nigerians, according to analysts, must also be applauded for believing in the One Nigeria project, and above all, for their belief in the fact that election is not war.
We don't have any other country than Nigeria, so we should remember that it's only in Nigeria that we can serve our people and live for people. We can leave a good name to yourself and to your family.
In Abuja, Timothy Yusuf, NT News.
All right, that report sets the tone for tonight's discussion. Let me start off by introducing our guests. We'd like to welcome to this program Professor Chudi Wazurike, who is a former member of the House of Representatives, is a policy analyst. Professor Wazurike, thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Let me also welcome to this program Dr. Hassan M. Liman. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria, legal practitioner. Thanks for being here. All right. And also here tonight is Professor Nazifi Abdullahi Derma, a development economist. Thanks for being here.
Good evening, Nigerians, and thank you, Cyril.
Okay, well, joining us from Lagos Network Center, we would have Muda Yusuf, who's the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's in our Lagos Network Center. And from our Jos Network Center, we have Professor Dakas, Clement Dakas, a senior advocate of Nigeria, former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, Plateau State, and immediate past Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of Jos. It's in our Jos Network Center. So, gentlemen, we welcome you to NTA Tuesday Live. Well, as usual, we acquaint you with the procedure. At the appropriate time, you can be part of the discussion in the studio. The various platforms will be on your screen. We advise that you take advantage of those platforms And as we always say, for those who will be phoning in tonight, when your call gets through to the studio, do us a favor, turn down the volume of your TV set. Just reduce the volume. That's the way to avoid the hurlback or the echo. And the best way to know that your call is through to the studio is you'll see your name appear on screen. Once your name appears on screen, it means that your call has been passed through to the studio, and you can just go right ahead with your question or comment. Don't bother too much about the greetings, just go straight to your point, and so we can have your comments or your questions, and whatever issues you raise, guests will be willing to respond to them. And we also advise that you keep it short so that others can also get on the platform. So once again, thank you for being part of NTA Tuesday Live tonight, and welcome. Right, gentlemen, the elections are just about over, save for 1 or 2 states, 3 or 4 of them, where supplementary elections will take place on Saturday. But in the main, the 2019 general elections have been held. And so, as usual, the people are looking to what next after the elections. What are these people they have elected to serve them going to do in fulfillment of whatever promises they made when they were seeking their votes? So, what should be the focus of those who found themselves in office after those elections? What should be the main issues that should engage their attention as we talk about national development, Prof?
Well, thanks, Cyril. There's no question that the elections winding down after this weekend. We hope we can take a holistic overview of the entire process. It has been very excruciating. It has also been very exciting. There's what is called the drama of democracy, and what we've seen here in this part of the developing world is an example of what Winston Churchill meant when he said that there could be nothing worse than democracy until you think of the alternatives. In other words, when you think of winners and losers and all the nasty things said and some of the extent of which people have gone to secure their place, some of it is just very disheartening. But there's no question that people were very ready to play their part in this democracy. The problem is not with the voters. Most people were willing to vote, and many people came out. The disappointment, of course, is that only about 30% ended up voting. But that's something that puts the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, on the spot, in the sense that a lot needs to be done. There's a lot of reform that needs to be carried out in that area. So the short answer to your overview is that, yes, we've seen winners and losers emerge. We've seen democracy operate not often the way it should operate, but at least we're still optimistic that it can be gotten right with the appropriate reforms. And one of the most important reforms is the Electoral Act. You can only look back and wish that the 2017 Electoral Act actually, or is it the 2018, actually made it through the process of validation and became law. But what we use is pretty much the old Electoral Act. So there's still problems as it is. So it's a mixed grill. The cup of water being half full and half empty. There are good things and there are questionable things and so on.
All right, we'll talk about those things. But interestingly, as you refer to the matter of electoral reforms, and let's put that even to Dr. Hassan Liman here and say, yes, in issuing out the certificates of return to those who were successful at the elections, the INEC chairman, as if setting, the tone or the agenda for the next National Assembly, advised that they should take a look at the, Electoral Act, and they advised for certain reforms. What are your views on that?
You see, if you look at the Electoral Act, particularly starting from the Act or the decree that ushered in this democratic dispensation in 1999, we had about 3 to 4 electoral acts. In 2002, we had an electoral act. It was repealed. In 2006, we had an electoral act. It was repealed by the 2010 Electoral Act. The 2010 Electoral Act is still the Electoral Act that the elections of 2011, 2015, and 2019 elections that were conducted. Going through these electoral acts, there are certain developments from 1999 till date. But however, there is still much that is needed to be done in terms of the electoral reform. Because if you look at it critically, in terms of the issue of voting, electoral violence, and other things, up till now, we are, with the greatest respect, been unable to get it right as far as electoral offenses, whereby offenses are committed randomly at the polling units especially, or the issue of financing by political parties and other related things. So these and others, if we look at it critically, yes, the attempt or efforts by the National Assembly, especially the outgoing 8th National Assembly, in reforming or amending the electoral acts. Those amendments have not been assented into. Those amendments have not been assented into. But like the chairman of INEC has said, the next assembly should make concerted effort in making sure that we have an act which will take or ensure that most of the problems associated with the inadequacies in the 2010 Electoral Act, which is the current operative legislation, is taken care of. So I am expecting, I am hopeful, the next assembly should do its best in working enough to ensure that we have an electoral act that will take Nigeria to the next level. And this, they have to do it working harmoniously with the executive to have a proper legislation in place.
Okay. So we're gradually getting a look at some of the issues which should concern those who are stepping into office. But let's come to Professor Dharma now and say, let's put the same questions to you. You have issues of electoral reform, you have issues of national development, and this is a whole gamut of it. So what should be engaging the attention of the successful people at the polls at various levels, at the executive and the legislature?
Okay. I think there are specific recommendations that I do have in mind relating to the electoral reform, but let me make a synopsis. Particularly we economists, we tend to make a very big mistake thinking that if you have a very good economic policy and if you implement it, everything is solved. We tend to forget that all the economic managers are the political leaders. And good policy implementation, whether it is economic, political, or social, is derived from the quality of the leadership. And in the context of the present democratic dispensation we are in, the leadership recruitment process is extremely faulty, especially at the political party level. And until and unless the leadership recruitment process is able to bring about people who are qualitative, people who are patriotic, people who are nationalistic, whatever economic policy prescription you put, whatever any policy you put, it will go to naught. And we are very lucky that Mr. President refused to assent to the Electoral Act before the election. Now is an opportunity to start working early. And part of the key recommendations, which I believe need to be inserted into the electoral reform, is that, number one, because of the dearth of internal party democracy across all the parties, the Electoral Act must be specific that every political party must have direct primary election for every position, right from councillorship up to Mr. President. Because if you are a party member and you believe in that party and the members of that party believe in you, you should be able to contest with anybody, sell your ideas, and the party should be able to fill the best in every position, right from councillorship up to Mr. President. Secondly, there must be compulsory biometric registration of each member of every political party and link it to national identification number so that somebody will not register in one party and go to another party. Thirdly, there must be compulsory payment of appropriate fees by registered members of political parties towards proper funding of those political parties so that the party will have enough money and therefore will not rely on selling humongous nomination forms that is beyond the reach of honest Nigerians, and therefore people of good character can come and contest on any party platform because the party is funded by members and the party have enough money to sponsor any member. And if the party sponsored any member is not sponsoring himself, it means the party supremacy will be entrenched, the party manifesto will be implemented, qualitative people at every level will be able to rise to leadership position, and then we can start getting things right.
All right, thank you very much. And you also have raised a number of issues. But at this point, let's go over to Lagos Network Center and join Mr. Muda Yusuf, who is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Well, thanks for being with us. And you heard how we started off this evening. And the question would be, yes, the elections are just about over, and people are stepping into those offices. So what should be the preoccupation of those who were successful at the polls? There are so many issues, electoral reforms, and of course, Nigerians are out looking for development, all-around development.
Thank you very much, Cyril. Let me comment briefly on the earlier comments by the guests in the studio. The issue is that the current configuration of the electoral process is such that it is very difficult for people of capacity and character to emerge as leaders in the current political process. That is the reality, especially within the context of what it costs to emerge as a candidate at the party level and what it costs to fund the electoral process, the election and all of that. So we have a major challenge in terms of quality, capacity, and character of candidates. But having said that, that is what we have. And we have to make the best of what we have. So that is why, as citizens, we should realize that democracy is not just about elections. It's about continuous engagement of those that we have elected, so that they deliver the kind of dividend that we expect from them. Because one of the shortcomings we have had as a country is the weak citizen engagement of leaders. And that is why in many cases, either at the local government level, at the state government level, at the federal level, there is so much impunity. And our leaders just do things and they get away with it, because there is no strong citizen engagement. So as citizens, we must learn that. Now, coming from the private sector, what is paramount for us in the private sector is the creation of an enabling environment for investors. We have a major challenge with employment in this country. We have a major challenge with poverty. The way to deal with these issues is to strengthen the capacity of this economy to create jobs. The government, either at local government or state level or federal level, have practically reached the limit of its capacity in terms of job creation. If anything, many of the government agencies are even over-bloated in terms of staffing. So the salvation lies in strengthening the investment environment. because it is investors that can create jobs that are sustainable, quality jobs. And it is through investment that can also generate revenue. Because a major challenge that we have currently is the capacity of the government to fund its obligations. If you talk to any ministry, all the MDAs, the common complaint across all of them is the issue of funding. So we must have a system where the government can fund its basic obligations to the citizens. And you can only get revenue depending on the capacity of those who will pay you the tax. Because you generate revenue from the economic activities in the environment. So we need to deepen and strengthen the capacity of the private sector, create an environment for them. And when I'm talking about private sector, I'm not just talking about all the multinationals. I'm talking about the small businesses, the micro enterprises, the medium enterprises, the large enterprises, the foreign investors, and all of that. We need to create the environment for them to be able to create the jobs. And the way to know what to do is to continuously engage those who are investors. Those who are investors across all sectors of the economy. That is why we have the various ministries. We have the IT ministries, we have the Agric ministry, we have the solid mineral ministry. There has to be regular interface so that we don't have policies that don't fit the challenges of the moment. So these are some of the things that we need to entrench as we move to the next level, so that there is proper communication, deeper communication, broader communication between the business community, between the investing community, and the political leadership at all levels of government. These things are very critical.
We'll return to you during the course of the program. But again, let's go over to Jos now. And Professor Dakas is right there in our Jos Center. You've had the privilege of listening to the contributions of the other guests. And let's hear you from your perspective.
Thank you very much, Cyril. I think that we need to remind those that have had the benefit of being elected by Nigerians that the Constitution is very clear about what is expected of government. And I would often, as a constitutional lawyer, refer to Section 14 of the Nigerian Constitution that makes it abundantly clear that first, sovereignty belongs to the people of Nigeria, from whom government, through the Constitution, derives all its power and authority. And our elected leaders must always remember that sovereignty relies with the Nigerian people. Second, the same Constitution provides that the primary purpose of government is to ensure the security and welfare of the Nigerian people. And so if you are elected, you have the privilege of being elected into public office. You must always prioritize the security and welfare of the Nigerian people. And in terms of agenda setting, along some of the conversation that has unfolded, is the imperative need to remember that one of the biggest challenges with the Nigerian democratic experience is actually the humongous cost of governance that we grapple with. Whether it is at the level of the legislature, where you find that beyond what has been recommended and enacted into law, you find that there are a lot of so-called creative accounting that often ends up with salary and allowances that are far beyond the capacity of the national economy to contend with. Or you find that the abuse of the appointments of aides, you find a special assistant, a senior special assistant, that assistant has a PA, that PA has an assistant, and you end up with ballooning cost of governance. At the end of the day, you find that we often are not even able, in the context of national development, to devote a lot more resources to capital expenditure. And so at the end of the day, a great deal of our spending is in the area of recurrent expenditure. And this is not sustainable. And it is absolutely critical going forward that we address that fundamental challenge if we want this country to make progress.
Quite interesting. Yes, some would say That's how to spread the pie around, the cake around. Special advisors, special assistants, senior special assistants who have, you know, advisors and senior assistants as well. And the cost of governance is one of the things that Professor Dakas has just raised here. As you look at it, and this cuts across both the executive, the legislature. You used to be in the legislature yourself, and let's hear you on some of these issues.
Oh, no, he's quite correct. I mean, it's a system that's been around for a long time. I mean, Parliament didn't start just yesterday. Right. We've had elections in this country since 1922. You know, let's not forget that we've been practicing whatever version of democracy we want to call it for quite a long time. And but like all democracies, we must keep on reforming. We don't look at the problem at the moment and think that's enough to bring down the system. It just simply needs a system of robust reformers. And let me just, you know, since the idea here is to look at how this country can move forward after the elections, I would say clearly that political development is really the most fundamental in many ways, in the sense that if we don't have credible party politics in particular, credible, free and fair, productive party politics, everything else will come crumbling down. And the idea is not to think of a unipolar analysis where one variable is the most important, but there's no question that the legitimacy of the entire system depends pretty much on the continuity of the democratic ideal in and of itself. And the parties are the carriers of democracy. And in this particular context, they have really woefully failed in Nigeria, as my colleague has so clearly outlined. You know, there's a question of character, there's a question of quality, there's a question of the recruitment process, as it were. And people feel very offended, feel cheated because of the party process. So I would say that if you're looking at the number one reform that needs to be done as quickly as possible, that would be that of having a credible electoral law that mandates the political parties to practice the whole idea of internal democracy in a very robust and visible manner. But I will add that if these parties don't have any ideological direction, we also have a problem. And that is what is really missing. All the parties are really mutually exchangeable. They don't stand for anything particularly specific. They're not going to go to war over any policy matter per se. There are several things that each of the parties was talking about, but others didn't even catch up on them. So I would say very clearly that until we understand that democracy calls for robust ideological debates, we have a problem. Right. And I would say very clearly that we can also look at the kind of inherited Western model of adversarial democracy and ask ourselves whether in the context of our culture and heritage, whether this sort of adversarial democracy that encourages people to engage in assaults, hate speech, mutual recrimination, tribal type of sentiments, religious type of sentiments in a multi-ethnic, very complicated, multi-civilizational society as Nigeria, whether that is helpful. Because there are alternatives to Anglo-American models of democracy. There is what is called constitutional democracy, mostly in Central Europe, Switzerland, Norway, and so on. That's why those places have been very stable. We can think of that. Or we can think of a different kind of model altogether. But this could be something going forward. You know, you don't simply say we've now adopted the American model and that will solve all our problems. This is not America. And it doesn't have to be.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have our first caller on the line. If you're still there, calling in from Abuja, Kennedy is on the line. Hello, Kennedy. Hello, do we have Kennedy on the line?
Yeah, Mr. Cyril, good evening to all the panelists. Move straight to the point, looking at the topic for today. You see, Nigeria is actually a great country with very good policy, but over the years we have missed one single thing. You know, Nigeria is fast becoming a country with good policies, but being turned into a graveyard of good public policies, in the sense that we have very good policies. Implementation is always our problem. Now, looking at electoral reforms, what have we actually done? Have we got them right with the reforms that are actually, coming up? Take, for instance, the card reader issue. Have Nigerians complied, or the INEC, the electoral umpire, complied with what exactly is expected of us? Regarding the use of card readers, you discover that in some states it will be used, accepted results, accepted. In some states they are not used, and you still accept results. Now, be that as it may, I want to also call on political actors to actually take their jobs serious, and all Nigerians. It's a work in progress that everybody must dedicate his time, his energy, in order to see that our democracy succeeds. Like Reverend Hassan Matthew Kuka would always say, once gave an instance, a little child who returns back home with a fair result in history language, and topic, when the father asks, why is your performance very poor in history? And he said all the questions that were asked in that exams were questions old questions that never existed. He came to meet, the issue is that we must look at our history, and everybody must learn. I also want to commend Professor Dakas from Jos, who said that security of lives and property is paramount. As stakeholders, we need to do our best by ensuring that we secure lives and property. For instance, the present administration came in with a mantra of change before this the just concluded election. Have we actually achieved that change, or we ended up being in change? And the other one is next level. Are we actually going to achieve our next level of development, next level of progress, or we are going to end up in next level? So I want to call on the president, the government, and everybody that as Nigerians we all have a stake in this country called Nigeria. God bless Nigeria. I wish the ninth assembly that is yet to be constituted a very successful tenure, and I pray they come in to work with the executive so that Nigerians will achieve the benefit of democracy. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Kennedy. Well, back here, sometimes it would seem as if it's a question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Yeah. Here we are trying to put together what should be, the agenda for, the next level of governance. But then you have raised questions about the recruitment process. We've also raised questions about electoral reforms. And here we're talking about the quality. If you cannot get the right quality of people into governance, then of course you may not expect to do any better than, where you are today. So should this be from that level of the recruitment process? And there are some who would argue, wouldn't that take a long time? Isn't that a long-term plan? Because if you start that today, it does mean that you should be looking to another 10, 15, 20 years to get quality, the kind of quality leadership which you're advocating. Yes.
You think about it.
Yes. You see, we have resumed democratic dispensation in 1999 after the military intervention. This is almost 20 years now, since we are back to democracy. Every day the question is raised, and then we are quick as saying that our democracy is a learning process. We are learning. I don't want to agree with the greatest respect that we should continue learning. Yes, we have to learn, but the political class must critically look at particularly the internal party democracy. Because if you don't have an internal party democracy with a clear-cut agenda or manifesto by each of the political party, especially ideological manifestos, before the military intervention, the political parties between 1979 to 1983, with all sense of responsibility, had a clear vision, clear direction of the kind of policies entrenched or embedded in their manifestos. But today, you have the electoral body registering almost 100 political parties. You ask, even in some cases, the chairman of a political party, what is the manifesto of his party? He doesn't even know the details of the manifesto of his party. And we're saying this political party will present candidates for the election without having an identifiable project or vision or mission of what they intend to carry out for the people of Nigeria. So unless and until we set a clear direction, and this leads us to the issue of the electoral reform. In the electoral reform, the political parties must have clear direction as to what is their mission and their vision. Secondly, there must be clear ways and manner in which candidates that will stand election are fielded in accordance with the internal democracy by a credible primary election. Because if you have a situation whereby political parties, notwithstanding the provisions of the Electoral Act, that they must conduct primary election before fielding candidates, still you have people just going in without that primary election, and that is why we're having the problem. People that are not supposed to find themselves in position of authority do find themselves because we are not following the right procedure. So the electoral reform must look at this critically and ensure that when we are reforming, especially amending the Electoral Act, or further amending the Electoral Act, some of these things should be entrenched and embedded in the Electoral Act.
The question of the number of political parties, isn't that as a result of is that not a law issue? I mean, the election management body has to register as long as the parties applying for registration fulfill certain conditions. But do they necessarily have to get on the ballot on just that?
Yes, you see the Constitution talks of freedom of association. Before the decision in 2003 by the Supreme Court of Nigeria as to whether or not INEC can limit the number of parties that will be registered or can delist political parties if registered, we had few political parties that contested the 1999 general elections. But now we have a situation that if a party or an association applies for registration and it satisfies all the requirements, INEC is under an obligation to register that political party.
But that's the problem. Do they satisfy most of those?
Most of them don't even satisfy the criteria. They don't even have...
Yeah. So I think in this context,
yes,
there is nothing that is stopping us from making necessary constitutional amendment, if that be, because the reality, as my colleagues have earlier said, is that we are running an extremely costly democracy. And the cost component of our democracy have eluded us from freeing very limited resources towards satisfying the needs of the people. And the reality is that as an emerging democracy with 180 million people, with 2.9% average growth rate of our population, with a high dependency on oil, and with advancement in technology, researches, and alternative sources of energy, certainly the market of our major source of income has diminished and is not likely to come back in the nearest future. So what we need to do is to sit down, think, work together as a team so that we can be able to define a sustainable funding framework for our democracy that will free resources for sustainable development.
All right, I'll return to you in a moment, but let's get back to the phones, and we have another caller from Adama this time, Nuruddin calling in. Hello, Nuruddin.
Hello, Sue. I wonder why whenever the executive, they are always fighting with the judiciary, the legislature. There is something I encourage what my Thomas Sule said. He said, good leaders, when they deviate or falters, they expect the ordinary citizens, the academicians, to blow a horn of warning. He says such good leaders listen to and heart this warning and they respond constructively. Our problem here is whenever the executive, they are always fighting with the legislature, so also we cannot move further without merging together as one Nigerian, one nation, put our hands together. There is what we call boom analogy, whereby whenever we are in, we will match ourselves together, we will stand as one, and we will move the country further. We have this problem, so thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And now let me return to you. Well, you started talking about the cost, the huge cost that you incur, but that even goes straight first to how much money, if you know how much money the election management body has to request, then the huge cost that goes into satisfying all the conditions because of the peculiarities of the Nigerian situation. You have to involve, huge numbers of security personnel. They've got to get paid for those extra. And then during electioneering campaigns, you shut down the whole country. Everything grinds to a halt. And after that, what Professor Dakas talked about, you now have hordes and hordes and hordes of aides who are now servicing those who are in office. And where in all of that can you begin to elucidate a proper economic base or plan as to take care of developmental needs of the nation?
Well, Cyril, the reality is that we have a new government. And I think the fundamental mistake of the past 4 years of not constructively engaging with all stakeholders in Nigeria toward governmental policy, I think it should change. There is simply nothing impossible that Nigerians cannot achieve. There is simply not, or rather, it is simply impossible or implausible for you to be spending hundreds of billions just to conduct an election. Other bigger economies like India, that is also a democracy, have divine ways of conducting election in a much more simpler and less costlier manner. Now, our peculiarity, be it as it may, we can be able to find a way out of it, provided we are able to bring all stakeholders to discuss and find durable solutions. The fundamental mistake mostly government did, or people in government did, they thought they have monopoly of wisdom and ideas. And that is a fundamental mistake. We must be able to engage Nigerians. Look, in the last 4 years, Cyril, when I appear on your programs on economic issues, I have said it and I will continue to say it. The National Assembly don't have the necessary luxury to be spending 6 to 7 months discussing budget. It is flabbergasting. It doesn't happen in any other democracy except Nigeria. But why does this happen? Because we have abandoned the culture of national development planning. Every member of National Assembly wants to infuse one constituency project or the other. They spend 7 months fighting the executive in order to do that. But when you go back, when you rebut the country back to the culture of national development planning, you have a comprehensive and all-encompassing development agenda that provide mutual complementarity to every sector of the economy in such a way that every stakeholder will bring his needs and wants into that national development plan, filter it, come up with a costed program for 5 years, so that when Mr. President in October is coming to present the budget, he is extracting the cost implication for the following year from an already costed plan. All the National Assembly need to do is to do some level of amendment to take care of inflationary pressures and then to provide oversight function. Within 60 days, they should be able to pass the budget so that the remaining period of the year, the National Assembly should be engaging in productive and engaging discussion toward institutionalizing better and good governance and providing oversight function, which is their key responsibility, not to be dissipating much time and resources and our resources toward discussing budget and trying to infuse constituency projects.
All right, let me take it back to the private sector and back to our Lagos Center with the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And yes, you talked about building the capacity of the private sector and creating the enabling environment so that the private sector can play a key role. But as it seems right now, the private sector itself is to a large extent dependent on patronages from the government.
I don't agree with you. There may be a few contractors and all the rest that are dependent on the government. But majority of the private sector are not dependent on government. The value of our economy today is about 130 trillion. Over 80% of this is coming from the private sector, people who are really entrepreneurs. And the SMEs are contributing a huge chunk of this across all sectors. We're talking about manufacturing, talking about agriculture, talking about service sector. They are populated largely by the private sector that are not dependent on government. The percentage of those dependent on government are very few. That is why it is important that we get things right with the enabling environment. Let me acknowledge the fact that the government has been doing a lot with the PEBEC, that is Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council. The Vice President has been engaging a lot, at least in the last 3.5 to 4 years, with the private sector, exchanging ideas on what is going right, what policies need to be reviewed, and so on and so forth. But we need to see that segment of economic management better strengthened. We need to strengthen the Enabling Business Environment Council, the Secretariat, and the economic team as a whole. Because some of the things we have observed in the last 4 years, which I think we should correct at the next level, is to ensure that there is proper coordination between the key economic ministries. It is not nice for the economy, for ministries and agencies of government to be pulling in different directions. You have some pronouncement from custom, for instance, on imports. You have a different pronouncement from the central bank. You have situations where the finance ministry just come up with policies that the trade and industry ministry is not aware of. So there's a need for a proper coordination of economic policies so that as private sector, we have a policy environment that is predictable and that can inspire confidence. Because right now, we have pockets of policy. Sometimes you just wake up, you see a sudden policy shock. And the essence of national planning, which the professor mentioned, is to be able to guide investors over a long term. But these days, you have a tariff policy. Within a week or two, you see a circular. Another 2-3 weeks, you see another circular, either from CBN or from finance and all of that. All these things create a lot of uncertainty for the private sector and investors. And it weakens investors' confidence. That is why we have the kind of investment environment that we have. A lot of investors are scared in going into long-term projects because of the challenges of inconsistency in policy and poor policy coordination. So it is important to deepen the process of consultation and to deepen the process of coordination among all the key economic, and we need to strengthen the enabling business environment secretariat. Because a lot of issues affecting investors has to do with the investment climate. Another key thing that we need to deal with within the context of the allocation of resources is to invest properly in infrastructure. Today, our power situation is as bad as it was some 3-4 years ago. We have had a power sector reform, but we still have challenges. And it is not easy to transform and progress an economy if you don't have power. You need power to power the economy. You cannot industrialize if you don't fix the power sector. So we need to look at take a holistic view at the power sector situation. It's not just about cost-reflective tariff. Because each time I hear the operators in the sector, they talk about cost-reflective tariff. We need to deal with the issue of power in a very fundamental way, because it is affecting all sectors of the economy. And if you want the economy to grow, if you want to diversify the economy, because we cannot continue to rely on oil. Today, oil is accounting for over 80% or 90% of our foreign exchange earnings. It's accounting for close to 60% of our revenue. Suppose something happens to oil output, or there's a sudden drop in oil price, all our macroeconomic fundamentals will collapse. And how do you sustain an economy in that way? So we need to drive this issue of diversification, and we need to push the issue of the reform of the oil and gas sector. And within this context, I will submit that the president at the next level should appoint a full-time Minister of Petroleum, somebody who will be focused professionally and bring a lot of knowledge to the process and drive the reform, because we have not been able to unlock the huge potentials in the oil and gas sector.
All right. Let me stay with you a moment. Okay, let me stay with you a moment longer, especially when you speak about power. All right.
To excuse these kind of things. So we need to move fast in the area of reforms. We need to get the PIB passed very quickly so that we can properly diversify this economy.
Let me stay with you a moment longer, especially as you raise the question of power. The ordinary Nigerians, ordinary folks will say most of that is already in the private sector, and they haven't seen much about that.
We need to also properly analyze the situation. We need to examine the process of even the whole privatization itself. You can give something to the private sector and give to the wrong people. Because clearly, in the whole process of this privatization, we are seeing that in that sector, there is issue of capacity. There is issue of financial capacity. There is issue of technical capacity. Then there are elements, there are variables that are also out of the control of some of these providers in the power sector. Then we have the issue of over-centralization in the process. The entire power sector system is focused on the national grid. This is a country of close to 200 million people, very vast. How do we have that kind of heavily centralized system? And you have the disco dependent on the transmission people. Transmission is in the hand of government. You have the transmission people dependent on the gas suppliers. The gas suppliers are private sector people. And you have this long chain. And a chain can only be as strong as the weakest link. Then there are all sorts of leakages. MDAs are not paying their bills. Some military formations are not paying electricity bills. So there are all sorts of issues. That is why I'm saying that we need to unpack the entire thing. It's not about whether it is in the private sector or not. We need to look at what will work for this economy so that investors can have power, so that the citizens can also have the power. And I'm sure that if you look at it critically, we should be able to put concrete proposals on the table, because it is difficult to progress in this economy if the power sector remains what it is now.
All right, thank you. Let's go over to our Just Center now. And again, Professor Daka's been in our Just Center. And you've listened to the arguments back and forth. And some would say even in the development of our democracy, the judiciary has played an extraordinary role. we have seen a situation where elections have at one point in time were largely decided in the courts rather than through the ballot box. And these also call for, reform in the whole system. So how, when would Nigerians look forward to a situation where, yes, election is not just all about, democracy is not just all about elections, but then the elections are a process where the true elected representatives of the people emerge from the ballot box rather than from courtrooms?
Well, thank you very much, Cyril. I think that is a fundamental point that you have made, but it takes us back. Let me step back a little bit. The fact that very many Nigerians who seek political office see this as a means of making money far beyond their capacity ordinarily to earn money. And they see politics not as a platform for impactful service above self. And therefore, you find a great deal of desperation on the part of many of the individuals that run for public office. And therefore, it's very difficult, even though we have challenges with our electoral system, it's very difficult, even where some individuals lose fair and square, for them to accept defeat. And so they go the whole hog. Some of them try to undermine the judiciary. Some of them try to bribe their way through the system. And we have seen this in quite a number of places. But I often remind people, if you look at political appointments in the White House in the US, for instance, you will find that when someone is leaving the White House, except a situation where the president decides to fire the individual, you will find that these individuals are leaving generally for about three major reasons. The first, the individual may tell you that I need time with my family. Second, the individual will tell you that I need to attend to my health. But third, which is critical in the context of this interaction, is that the individual says, I need to go take up employment in the private sector so that I can earn a living wage sufficiently enough to take care of my family. But in this country, the converse is the case. And you find that instead of people leaving public office to make money in the private sector, people are leaving the private sector to make money in public office. I can give you my own personal experience. I was Attorney General of my state, and I left office about 13 years ago. But before I agreed to accept the appointment as Attorney General, the governor called me and made me an offer. And I said to him, no, I was grateful, but that I could not take up that appointment at that key point in time because it didn't key into my agenda. But it was his response that was very instructive. And he said to me, I have made you an offer that many people are prepared to kill for, and you are saying it doesn't key into your plans. So until we realize that public office is about public service, that public office is about public trust, and an obligation on our part, as I pointed out earlier, to prioritize the security and welfare of the people, people will continue to be very desperate. In terms of the specific reforms that need to be undertaken in the context of the judiciary, not just in the context of election petitions. The National Judicial Council has been playing some role that is commendable, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. We need to ensure that we hold people accountable. We need to ensure that the judicial process is fair, impartial, and inspires confidence in the majority of Nigerians. And if we address the challenge of electoral reform, you can be sure that if someone wins an election in which he is confident that the process has been fair and credible, we won't burden the courts. And keep in mind that each time election petition panels are constituted, these are serving judges. And they are already overburdened by a great deal of work in their normal everyday work. And you know the intractable delay that often confronts this. This also has profound implications for enabling business environment. And then you now pick these same judges that are already overburdened you take them away from 6 months or more, and they have to prioritize election petitions. And so, and sometimes you find that, unfortunately, because some judges see these as an avenue to make money because they are pliable, at the end of the day, some of them, unfortunately, I hope very few of them, actually even lobby for selection to these panels. So there's a great deal of work. But we need to ensure that we engender a regime of accountability, that there is no impunity, and to make sure that public office is one that is about service. Let me just give you one other quick and very quickly, one experience. You alluded to the fact that each time there's election in this country, it's like we're in a state of war. And schools are closed, businesses are shut down. The economists on this panel can tell us how much money we lost when the election was first scheduled, and then it was rescheduled, and why we cannot leverage on technology, for instance, to cut the cost of running the electoral system. And the experience that I give you, I have had the privilege of being a visiting professor in Canada's preeminent law school, the Osgoode Hall Law School. And on one of the occasions that I went to teach, my Nigerian colleague, who is a Canadian citizen, told me he was going to vote. And coming as I was from Nigeria, I began to imagine that the schools will be closed down, you have to deploy thousands of security personnel. And I said, and we woke up in the morning and he said to me, hey, let's go teach our class and then I'll go vote. I said, are schools supposed to be in session? Are they not supposed to be shut down? And we just walked to the class, taught our lessons, and we just drove to the venue where he was supposed to vote. We didn't see a single police person or security personnel. I would assume, of course, there were CCTV cameras. And he just walked in and voted, and that was it. We've got to get to that point where election is not a do or die affair, where election is not war, where our politicians are extremely desperate, and then we end up with a situation where even when people have lost an election, they overburden the judicial system with needless petitions. And I hope that we will get to that point where we can truly say to ourselves that we are determined that indeed those that have been elected see their election as a privilege and a great opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the vast majority of Nigerians. Only then can our democracy make progress.
Professor Chudi Wazorike, that will be the day, would it?
Right. That will be paradise. Right. It will be quite a while in coming, but that's the vision thing we're talking about here. Right. You know, that's the ideological parameter we just simply related to. You know, because unless you have some clarity, policy clarity in mind, you have a roadmap, you have a vision. This thing just don't work in isolation. Right. We have a situation where unless we have politicians with ideas, good qualitative leaders with ideas for the 21st century, who very clearly are prepared to run political systems based on due process, based on some principles that are clearly understood by everybody, we'll continue to have a legitimacy crisis, because that's what we're really having here. The institutional crisis at all levels, where the National Assembly is in crisis, the judiciary is in crisis, even the presidency and the quest for the presidency is also in crisis. So when you have a situation where the country is a bit unnerved by the conflicting signals we have from the economy, from the polity, even from the culture, then we have an issue. Right. And I would say very clearly that until we, and I agree with what Professor Dakas is saying, that there's really need for a lot of reform. But I would say clearly that going by your original question, where do we stand? If we're to itemize, I would say very clearly, it would be wonderful if we can do everything, but everything cannot be done all at the same time. There needs to be an immediate review of the last election and how this can inform the Electoral Act that has now not been signed into law. We need to go back to that. That's the first thing. Very clearly, when it comes to the economy, and the economists can tell us, I totally agree with the whole idea of a return to a national plan. That's how this country grew to some degree. The problem always is how do you align in a democracy with so many states pursuing their own independent policies, for instance, how do you align them? It can be done. The Economic Commission of this country is there. The question then is, how do all these work synergistically in such a way as to grow the economy, because the economy is really growing at less than the population. And so, so you can itemize all these things, from the electoral reform, the economic reform. But I would say, in conclusion, that unless we also come to a point where we look at the income disparities in this country, the gap, the huge yawning, almost criminal gap between rich and poor, and how all these things affect the perception, the legitimacy, the voluntary legitimacy accorded to the system by the people and so on. You have all these youths, you have all these young people doing all kinds of heinous things, herdsmen, gangs here and there. All these things have economic roots, as it were. So we have a more general problem, I would say.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Chudi Wazurike. At this point in time, Professor Wazurike will be taking leave from this program, but our other guests will remain even as we take a short break. When we return, there will be more on NTA Tuesday Live. Professor Wazurike, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Cyril.
Right.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Right, thanks for staying with us. And as you probably would imagine, a lot of discussion has been going on behind the scenes here, even as we went on break. And so we will start off the segment and by talking about the economy, taking a deeper look into the economy and industrialization. Now, Mr. Muda Yusuf, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, started talking about it, things that you need to do urgently to get the economy in better shape. Industrialization was one thing he talked about, and you definitely know that there are so many things that can go into industrialization. So let's talk about that.
Now, as I've said earlier, an economy that has 180 million people, an emerging economy, is an economy that have a lot of opportunities. But the ability of those opportunities to be benefited from is extremely dependent on an all-encompassing governmental economic policy framework that incorporates citizens and all stakeholders' needs and ideas. And what do I mean by that? Now, besides the extremely high cost of governance, if you look at the costing of our expenditure, of our infrastructure projects, capital expenditure component is one of the most costliest in the world. We need to have a realistic conversation with all stakeholders so that other people can take us serious. Now, even if the market fundamentals of oil are right, even if there is a surge in the demand for oil, even if the price of oil is $200, our economic needs and developmental gaps cannot be filled with the additional inflow of resources that we have. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if you benchmark ourselves with just two other emerging economies, not in Europe, take Brazil, take India. In 2018, the Indian federal budget is $460 billion. Brazil budgeted $1 trillion US. But it's not about money derivable from, let's say, sale of oil or other commodities. It's because these countries, they have a very coherent, transparent, and result-oriented public-private partnership policy and framework and law that make it possible for sovereign wealth funds from other parts of the world to key into the economic opportunities available in Brazil and India, and we need to do something fundamental to that, because even if you put all the public sector resources to our developmental needs, they cannot be able to satisfy us.
All right, I'll return to you in a moment because there's still an issue I'd like you to talk about. But let's try and take in this call from Ajayi, who's calling in from Makudi. Hello, Ajayi.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
My problem with Nigeria, we're talking about the next level. Hello. Hello.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yes, the next level we are talking about, the leaders we have now, they are called leaders, but really they are rulers, they are not leading us. Leaders lead by example, but they are leading without knowing what the subject, those who are voted in, really need. So they are full of entertainment, and they are full of showing us the other part and doing a different thing. So we are tired of hearing next level, next level. It's not new to us. We are only praying that God should really intervene in the situation of Nigeria. They give us empty promises without fulfilling any. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much. Now, Prof, let me return to you. And some would say that in the last 4 years, at least there were efforts by the current administration to broaden, the base, the economic base of the country, and to rely less on this one commodity, oil. And some would say, shouldn't there just be, a consolidation on these efforts?
Well, it is true that government has made efforts, particularly in the area of food production, and drastic reduction in the quantum of food we import to feed ourselves, which is a very good and commendable development. But beyond that, what we need to do, we need to reflect the economy. The extreme poverty and the low aggregate demand in the economy is the driver to low economic activity. And when you have low economic activity, the capacity of the economy to collect taxes and provide services is limited, because so many state governments will talk about increasing internally generated revenue. I used to laugh. From which economy? From an economy that is stifled? It is only when the economy is vibrant, people have means of livelihood, there are activities going on, then from those activities, government can be able to collect taxes, complement resources. So in the real sense, what we need to do is to have a proper direction. A situation whereby you, me, and most of the elites, from our head to toe, literally all that we wear, what we eat, what we use in our houses, are imported. We must sit down and think and come up with a very long-term industrial development master plan, but with clear living by example from we, the elites, to start realistically patronizing what is made in Nigeria. Because even if you have all the money to pay for imports, the demand is increasing, so there's a limit to which you can be able to finance your unsatiable need for importation. So we need to have that. And let me tell you, up till now, nobody in this country in government can tell you this is our industrial development blueprint and master plan. Nobody can be able to show you. We need to have something like that. We need to stop depending on Chinese. The Chinese have invaded our country. They are bringing their products. They are making us our market. It is to their favor. But we cannot continue this dependency. We must be able to sit down, talk to ourselves, bring all the stakeholders, and then passion out a sustainable agricultural value addition oriented policy. Not just agricultural production, but agriculture with value addition, and a clear industrial development framework that will utilize intensively what we produce in our agricultural sector, add value to it, and then even start exporting. Okay. There is simply nothing that is impossible that Nigerians cannot achieve. What is missing is the galvanized framework to get the best Nigerians to deliver.
All right, let's try the phones again, and we have Ismaila calling in from Kaduna. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Cyril, good evening.
Good evening. Go right ahead. We can hear you.
Yes, I'm making my own contribution as a Nigerian on the topic of eco. Yes, my contribution is regarding the economic development of Nigeria. You know, I was privileged to attend a trade-fair seminar in Kaduna in 2018, chaired by the former head of state, Major General Yakubu Gowon. At this seminar, categorically, His Excellency, the former head of state, stated that for the past 15 years, from 1999 to 2015, the resources of this country has been shared at the ratios of 80 to 20% between the north and the southern part of this country. If for the over 15 years period of time, 80% of the Nigerian resources has been shared in the southern part of this country and only 20% been shared in the northern part. Coupled with all that problem, then the development of insecurity in this northern Nigeria has been there for the past 12 years. And there's no any financial infrastructure in the whole northern Nigeria. Go from the whole north, from Yola to Sokoto, Sokoto to Kebbi, Kebbi to Kwara to Borno. There's no single financial institution in that area. When you are talking of development, economic development, and that man from Lagos was saying that we need an industrial development. Why is the industry? For the past 15 years, the whole industry in the northern part has been closed down. The industry I work in, we have 3,500 workers. We have 3 shifts, and today none of the industries are existing. What sort of development? Are you going to develop on just a piece of paper by writing theoretical management theory? You do that. Practically, where is it on ground? We can't just be deceiving ourselves with development. Northern Nigeria has a total population of over 50% of the Nigerian population. And nothing is there on ground to show up. Only English, grammar, theoretical, economic theory. Put it on ground, practically. Okay. Let's see what's on ground. So we'll go for development.
All right. Thank you very much, Ismaila, calling in from Kaduna. But let's still dwell a little longer on the economy. And let me go back to the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and say, well, the issue which Prof raised here to deal with goods, you know, the penchant for imported goods, you know, and the attempts to cut down this dependence on foreign goods and promote Nigerian products. That is a direction which started some time ago, and many are looking forward to it. But again, there's a segment that says, at what cost? Would that do harm to the economy, for instance, in terms of people saying, look, if you don't have enough, why cut off a supply, a supplementary supply?
You see, an economy gets the kind of investment that it deserves. If we want to make this economy a producing economy, we need to create the environment for production to be a profitable business. Most of those who are in production today, some of them are even regretting being in production. Because by the time you go through our ports to clear your raw materials, by the time you go through the frustrations that the customs will impose on you, by the time you go through the rigor of transportation, either of your raw materials or your finished goods, by the time you go through the rigor of paying interest rates of almost 25–30% to the banks, by the time you go to the market and you are grappling with either smuggled goods or grappling with issues of weak purchasing power of the citizens, it makes production very, very frustrating. That is why we see these days a lot of funds are going into investment in treasury bills. It's now the most attractive thing to do. Even the banking industry, they are making more money from investing in treasury bills, buying government bonds, than supporting entrepreneurs in the economy. That itself is a disconnection. Disconnecting the financial system from the real economy. These are major shortcomings in this economy that we need to fix. If you don't deal with the fundamental issues impeding or constraining production in this economy, we continue to have the kind of things that we have. The average Nigerian consumer is a rational being. He goes to the market, he looks at quality, he looks at price, he looks at affordability. That is the basic thing. And we need to create a situation where those who are producing locally can also produce competitively. And we need to get our policies to support that objective. We need to get our institutions to support that objective. It's not enough to be banning products, excluding them from foreign exchange market and all of that. That is not a sustainable solution. The solution is to create the environment to make production a productive, competitive investment. That is why we have more traders than those who are in production. If you talk to the average banker, once you talk about setting up a manufacturing or going into farming or processing, they look at you as a high-risk borrower. And they don't want to give you money. So these are the kind of frustration. So we need to look at our policies. We can influence the situation with our tax policy, for instance. Taxation is not just about revenue targets. You can use tax to also stimulate investment through the kind of concessions that you give. Because we have a very narrow view of some of these policy components. Because if you see the tax authorities, their primary targets are those who are investors. If you set up a business today, the first government official that will visit you will be the tax people. Is that the way to encourage those who are in production? When you have people who are not doing anything tangible, who are making billions of naira just sitting in hotels, but the moment you set up a factory that is visible, the first visitors you see are the tax people. In other climes, those who are in production that are creating jobs are given a lot of incentives. So we have to change our orientation in the area of tax policy to identify who you should be chasing and who you should be considerate with. Then we need to look at our tariff policy. Sometimes those who formulate tariff policy just sit down and just turn out policies, increase tariff, reduce tariff, impose import prohibition and all of that, in a manner that is not coherent, that is not supporting any particular policy direction. We have instances where inputs into manufacturing process have very high duty. How do you want them to be profitable? We are talking about creating renewable energy, supporting industries and alternative power sources. The tariff on solar panels went up. The tariff on batteries that's used for solar panels went up. How do you want to encourage people to be able to go into solar? So these things have to be coherent. Only recently, the last tariff review on tariff policy, the tariff on medical equipment was moved from about 15% to 70%. Medical equipment, surgical equipment. How on earth can anybody do that? In a country where we are talking of human capital problems, when we are talking about issues of high cost of medical care, where we are talking about issue of access to medical care. And yet the tariff on equipment that you don't produce is going up. So we need to sort out our and somebody must have an ear on it. So that we don't just have some bureaucrats sitting in the ministry and just changing tariffs anyhow.
We'll return to you, Mr. Muda Yusuf, we'll return to you. But speaking about the bureaucracy now, and let's come to you. And the president has said he's going to carry out a performance assessment of key players in governance so he can get a clear view of performance ratio. Some Nigerians have said, well, that's a right step to take. But again, the question would be, how much of that can you go into? How far can you drive that policy, given, you know, the background of the kind of politics, I'm returning to that again, that you play, in which everyone who has taken a part in bringing a government into power expects to be rewarded?
You see, the executive power of the Federation is exercised by the President through the Vice President, ministers in the government, and those that are officials in government, permanent secretaries down the ladder. Every appointee of the President is responsible to the President. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria gives the President the power to appoint those that he finds fit and proper to position of authority where they will assist him in the governance of the Federation. Notwithstanding the fact that politicians have assisted the President in campaigning around the 36 states of the Federation in ensuring that he emerges as the President of this great country of ours. But however, he is the driver as far as the Constitution is concerned. I do not expect, notwithstanding the fact that politics is about whoever has contributed to the emergence must ensure that he's given a place to participate. But my expectation from the President, and that is the expectation of most Nigerians, that those that mean good for this country, the President should only appoint, in my opinion, persons that are credible, persons that have experience, especially in certain key positions that desire or demand professionalism. Within the political class, you find those that are professional and expert in each of the field. You'll find them all over. So the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria will do an assessment, or is expected to do an assessment, do a background check to ensure that those that will be appointed have the requisite qualification and the know-how to assist him in the governance of this country. I believe that he will find them within the political class and even outside the political class, because the Constitution does not restrict him, or has not restricted him to appoint ministers and other officers to assist in governance, only those that are members of his political party or those that are political players. He can do that. But like I said earlier, within the political class, or even within his political party, he can find those that are capable and competent. And I believe that the President will do the right thing for this country.
All right, Professor Dakas in Jos Center, assessing key players in governance? What should be the criterion here, especially when you have the political forces real playing hard and playing, as they say, hardball?
First, let me make a few comments regarding the earlier discussion about the economy. Nigeria, going forward, clearly must look beyond oil. We are essentially in the knowledge economy. One of our callers alluded to the challenges that the northern part of this country grapples with. It's a legitimate concern, but let's ask, what is the level of investment of the governors or the governments in the northern part of the country in the education of the young people in the northern part of this country? If you have someone that is educated, has a future to look forward to, then it even becomes very difficult to manipulate the individual. It becomes difficult to brainwash the person, and it becomes very difficult to have some of these individuals recruited in the name of Boko Haram, for instance. When you are in a part of the country where someone comes or an organization comes and says Western education is evil or Western education is sin, that's already a red flag. And so what is the level of investment of the northern governments in the education of the children? In this country, if my recollection of the statistics is right, there are 13 million out-of-school children. Out of that number, 11 million are in the northern part of the country. And in a knowledge economy, how is it that it is more convenient for politicians to literally just latch onto the ignorance and the illiteracy of these masses of the people to gain political power and yet not do anything to alleviate their plight? And I think that it is also important for us to remember that the northern part of this country has had a considerable part of both the military and political leadership. How has that translated into a meaningful improvement of the lives of the masses of the people in the northern part of the country? And these are hard questions that political leaders in the northern part of Nigeria must confront. And they must do so genuinely out of a commitment to make a positive difference. And you can see the implications also in terms of the disparity between the rich and the poor that some of our panelists alluded to. And I would often remind us about a statement, a very profound statement that is credited to Kennedy. Kennedy says, if the poor cannot sleep because they are rich, if the poor cannot sleep because they don't have anything to eat, the rich cannot sleep because the poor are awake. And we must constantly remind ourselves about that imperative. If the poor cannot sleep because they don't have what to eat, the rich cannot sleep because the poor are awake. And so there must be investment in education along the lines of Nigeria beyond oil, the imperative need for us to focus on the knowledge economy. And think about it. When you look at the United States, for instance, the bulk of the oil is in the state of Texas. But Texas is not the biggest economy in the states in the United States. New York, California, and New York and California are not about oil. You think about Silicon Valley. You think about the entertainment industry. You think about the fact that New York is the economic capital of the world, so to speak, is the diplomatic capital of the world. When you look at the richest man in the world, the owner of Amazon, who at the moment is the richest person, is not into oil. Bill Gates is not into oil. Africa's richest person, Aliko Dangote, is not into oil. It's only now that he's beginning to think along the line of building a refinery. And so a knowledge economy is absolutely key going forward. But as the DG of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce pointed out, what is our policy regarding renewable energy, for instance? What is our policy that is sustained with a view to ensuring that we diversify the economy? Where are we in terms of what someone has said is a feeding bottle federalism? What are the implications in terms of the debate about restructuring? How do we devolve more power to component units of the Nigerian Federation? These are fundamental questions that we must engage. And it is when we do this in a holistic manner, then we can now come to engage the very specific question that you have asked, which is, what are the considerations that Mr. President or the governors must factor in terms of the choice of those who will hold public office? Again, it is absolutely critical that those who are chosen on the basis of competence, they're chosen on the basis of their integrity, they are chosen on the basis of their drive to offer service above self, and they are chosen on the basis of the fact that they are prepared to look beyond their own ethnic groups. I would sometimes tell you, for instance, that one of the biggest problems we have in this country is the fact that our weapons of mass destruction are not chemical, they are not biological, they are not nuclear. They are the manipulation of religion, the manipulation of ethnicity, the manipulation of other sectional fault lines, poverty, disease. And when you have people appointed into public office who see this and suddenly it is our turn to chop, then we have a very fundamental problem that at heart. And so I hope that Mr. President and the governors and other elected officials will be very deliberate, will be driven by the common good and the need to deepen our democracy and to ensure that we inspire confidence in the masses of our people, so that, you know the joke about Niger Delta and the Niger Delta militants breaking the pipelines. The joke is that they were told that the dividends of the oil and democracy is in the pipelines. They waited in vain for the pipelines to deliver the dividends of democracy, and they began to break into the pipelines in search of the dividends. I hope that we will not get to that stage, so that democracy will truly mean something for our people. When we came out of recession, Mr. President made a very profound statement. He said, I will not come to terms with the fact that we have come out of recession unless I see a visible improvement in the lives of the masses of these people. Until we do that, if the poor cannot sleep because they're hungry, the rich will not be able to sleep because the poor are awake.
The so-called, it's our turn, the so-called turn to chop. We've talked at length about what's expected of key actors, people who are in positions of authority. Yes. How about the citizens? How about the citizens? And at the level of the citizens, the folks who go out to cede, their power through the ballot to those who superintend over their affairs. How about them? What responsibility? You've seen cases of where people were willing to sell their votes for as little as 100 naira, and where people would celebrate as soon as one of their own gets in, and just like the "it's our turn to chop" that Professor Dakas spoke about. What's the responsibility of the citizens themselves?
You see, I feel sad when the citizens celebrate that their own has been appointed and it is their turn. The citizens, whom I describe as the followers, have a responsibility to ensure that those that are elected to positions of authority succeed. This idea that ours is in position today, he has a responsibility to his people to go and loot the public treasury and come back home and give them money. That should stop. I'm looking forward to a country whereby if any public officer steals from the public treasury and take it back home, the citizens, the people in his constituency, people in his community, even in his house, will ask him, what is your take-home pay? What is your salary as a public officer? Is this what you are earning, or is it your take-home pay? Until the citizens begin to ask those in position of authority questions, then the problem will not be solved. Because you have a situation whereby the citizens are aiding and abetting the public officers to loot our treasury. There are situations in this country, for instance, whereby those that have committed crime in terms of either drug and so on and so forth, other related offenses, they are being shielded by their own community. Even attempt to arrest them at times by the anti-graft agencies or the NDLA, you see the community are even shielding them. So this is a failure of the citizens. And in most cases, like Professor Dakas has said, is due to lack of education. If the people are properly educated and know their responsibility and know that they are supposed to ask those in position of authority questions as to the source of their wealth, then definitely, all right, we'll get to that.
And then we'll round off with the question of corruption and what it's done to every part of the, every facet of the nation's life, and how efforts to bring down the level of corruption have been made, either successfully or unsuccessfully. And of course, like it's just mentioned, it's happened so many times where people will say, this is our own, others have done it, why our brother, why our son, why our daughter?
Well, if you look at the issue from a holistic perspective, you realize that the unnecessary promotion of primordial loyalties of ethnicity, religion, and sectionalism is a deeply rooted behavioral problem. And as such, we need a very comprehensive framework of enlightenment in order to change the mindset. But beyond the enlightenment, an educated citizen is an enlightened citizen. But how do you provide education for the masses of the people when those entrusted with the responsibility are actually denying them such an opportunity in order to prevent them from making the right choices? So this brings us to another fundamental issue, that we need to strengthen institutions that are supposed to fight corruption, irrespective of who is involved and from where he is, so that if there is a clear-cut punishment across the board, devoid of ethnicity and religious coloration, everyone entrusted with the responsibility will be able to sit up. But importantly also, it is not just easy to catch somebody, go through the legal process, and convict him of corruption. So what we need to do, let's try as much as possible reform our accountability framework and make it extremely difficult for people to steal from public resources rather than dissipating time to prosecute them.
All right, let me quickly go to the DG of Lagos Chamber of Commerce. The issue of corruption and fighting it. Let's just take on that for the next couple of minutes because we're winding down now.
Yeah, corruption is a major problem, even in the private sector, because it affects the way things work. It affects the quality of our institutions. It affects the quality of policies. It affects the quality of even implementation of policies. So I think we should look at corruption beyond the issue of just stealing money or, tampering with treasury and all of that. That is important. But when we don't allow systems to function properly, either through the quality of appointments that we make or the quality of our processes and things like that, these are forms of corruption that sometimes can even be more damaging than people who steal public funds. So we should look at this in a very systemic way so that we have institutions that work. Because one of the failings of many developing countries, just as Prof said, is the quality of institutions. And it is the quality of appointment to institutions that makes an institution function and affect the quality of delivery of those institutions. So we need to deal with that, no matter where you want to bring anybody from. There is no section of this country that don't have people of capacity and people of character. That should be paramount in the way appointments are made, so that you don't have institutions that cannot support a system. No matter how well you craft a policy or how well intentioned you are, you need the institutions to drive the realization of your objectives. So the issue of corruption is very important to be addressed, and you should have institutions that also ensure that there are consequences for wrongdoings. The difference between our society and some other advanced economies is the issue of consequences. So we should have a structure that delivers consequences, either rewards or punishment. That is important. It's important.
Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, from our Lagos Network Center, we thank you for being on this program. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Very much,
okay. All right, and quickly to Professor Dakas. Now, just quickly, because you raised the subject of education and getting people who should be in public office and in governance positions. But how do you respond to this quickly, Prof? It's been said that some of those who have committed the most grievous infractions are highly educated people. What kind of example is that for those who want to acquire education?
Well, education liberates. Education gives you the capacity to interrogate. And while there might be people who would abuse the privilege of having been educated, I think that for the vast majority of the people, education is very liberating. Education gives you hope, gives you a future, and I can tell you without any equivocation that the future of this country, the credible response to Boko Haram, the challenge of the Almajiri system, for instance, out of school children, and most of these challenges that we grapple with lies in education. And that also means that we must improve the budgetary allocation to education, and the money that goes into education must be accounted for. I think that ultimately, if we have a citizenry that is educated, is conscious, then it also then literally keys into the earlier point you raised about the need for the citizens to be engaged and constructively so that we can hold our leaders accountable. That way, Nigeria, in my respectful view, will make considerable progress. Thank you.
At this point, I also say a very big thank you to Professor Dakas, Clement Dakas, a senior advocate of Nigeria, who joined us from Jos Network Center. It's been interesting talking to you on this program. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. My great pleasure.
All right. And back here in our Abuja studios, let me say Dr. Hassan M. Liman, also a senior advocate of Nigeria. Last word as we say goodbye.
Well, thank you very much. And I wish Nigerians to give the president the opportunity to take this country to greater height. Thank you very much.
All right, Professor Nazifi Abdullahi Dharma, your closing comments?
Well, my closing comment is to passionately appeal to Mr. President and all our elected governors that the time of bickering is over. It is the time to work together as a team towards liberating our economy from the quagmire it is. But importantly, Mr. President must look thoroughly, carefully, and unequivocally to appoint people with clearly defined responsibility and framework and performance contract, if possible, so that a situation whereby a minister will stay for 4 years without delivering anything must be booted out if he fails to deliver on the basis of the performance contract. Possibly he needs to sign with Mr. President, because this is what other developing economies that are emerging are doing, especially in Singapore, and we need to start putting square pegs in square holes.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Dharma. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and that's our program. We also like to thank you for being part of it. Next week, we'll reach you again on NTA Tuesday Live. I'm Cyril Stober. Bye for now.